But I think it is a dangerous narrative to keep using as a blanket statement when certain things are happening. Why do I say that? In Tanzania, there's so much more than just saying outsiders have come in and they want minerals, and so they are trying to disrupt the peace that we have. Because if you say that, then you will also be saying in 2027, this regime that every single working Kenyan who has a payslip is tired of, you are definitely now going to start saying that these people who are voting out Ruto are actually not those people, that they are outside forces who want to come in and mine for whatever minerals. It's a very dangerous narrative. You have to listen to the people of Tanzania for you to be able to weigh, is this really an external force? And when you listen to those people, they have very many pressing issues that they are able to articulate. And that's why in so many of those polling stations, they didn't come out to vote. If this thing was as black and white as Wakili wants to put it, why was the internet shut off? If it's black and white, as it happened in Libya, we saw everything unfold in Libya. No internet was shut off, the media was running. Why was the internet shut off? Why was the whole country in a blackout in a way that us as outsiders, we are not stupid. We can be able to see that, hey, listen, these are outside forces, because we would have seen, for instance, during the inauguration, during the swearing-in ceremony, we would have seen, even if not 32 million Tanzanians celebrating, we should have seen at least 1 million. We didn't have to be witnessing a swearing-in where there were no public, where the security was high. If at all you're saying these outside people have come to influence, what is happening to the 13 million voters who are so happy to give 87% of the vote to this lady? So we also sometimes have to just be, this is a black and white situation. Another thing, as you have put out, they were able to count these votes in 2 days of no internet and no electricity, but they counted them. If you look at that election, normally you have all these now foreign bodies and missions who come to do the observation of the election to make sure that they write a report back to their countries because they have partner ties or whatever. We had no representation of the European Union. We had no representation of the United States. We had no representation of international bodies that observe elections. Why? Because they were shut out. Because if I'm planning to steal an election, why the hell would I want EU and US and all these people who do observation, including those democratic bodies that are international, to actually come and write that? Indeed, in this polling station, there was 0 turnout, but we are going to report millions of votes that were cast. So it is no secret. For me, I think it's very simple. Samia was actually not elected. She inherited that seat out because, there was a death, and she happened to be the deputy. And this election was going to be a defining moment for Tanzania in terms of finally they get to exercise that democratic right and put in their leader. If none of these opposition shenanigans, if people were just allowed to be free, the leaders who wanted to vie for the election, and actually they were given a fair play, would we really have these kind of things happening? So for me, it's very simple. The fact that our deputy president, Kithure Kindiki, spent our taxpayers' money, got into a flight, went over there and sat down, smiled and clapped when that woman, the president now of Tanzania, said that it is in fact foreigners, alluding that it was Kenyans who came in, alluding that it was other people who came in. They're even trying to make it a religious war between Muslims and non-Muslims. The fact that he went there with the taxpayers' money, clapped when we are being accused of having gone to disrupt a democratic process. For me, I think that is an impeachable offense. Because as the deputy president, who is supposed to be a symbol of national unity, but not only national unity, a symbol of exercising the human rights, a symbol of a person who actually, an office that is pushing Kenyans and is pushing this nation to stand by the Constitution. Just by him being there and clapping and smiling when people have been killed and murdered, and literally, let me say, aliosha, akapatia hiyo inauguration and whatever mwosho moja. Right. For me, it was very sad, and let me tell you something. The next regime, because in 2027 these people are not going to be in office, That regime that comes in should not only put a commission of inquiry for all the corruption, they should put a commission of inquiry for all this nonsense we have been doing, interfering with all these states out there. South Sudan, Tanzania,
thank you,
all those things.
Time for us to take a short break. When we come back, we take a look one more time at what next for Tanzania and the EAC, now that this has happened. But very briefly, before we come back and take a look at our own politics, because it's also boiling very nicely here. And I can see
if the president of Tanzania says some people came from the neighboring countries, our largest or nearest border to Nairobi, for instance, is the Tanzanian border. So, and we saw what was happening in Amanga. But save for that, I think what we are seeing is an awakening of the people, because you look at what happened in Tanzania and think about what happened in Kenya in 2024, 2025, what has happened, just happened in Madagascar, Nepal, and Cameroon and other places. We are seeing a situation where the people are awakening, and that is why actually I think the analogy by the Daily Nation that this was a private ceremony would mirror what we saw in Kenya in 2007, in my view. And this would be maybe a point at which Tanzania needs to ask themselves, where do we need to go? If you recall, before 2007 in our own space, we did not have regulations or laws that define how an inauguration happens, the timing and all that. But after that, now we have what we have. You cannot be sworn in private. It has to be within at a certain time limit. I think it can't be beyond 2 p.m. So this is an awakening period for Tanzania and maybe for the rest of the region, in my view. But it's a sad story, in my view. I would have expected to see the 30+ million people being allowed at least to come and celebrate their win. But in this case, it's private.
Wow, you expect too much. Ikua, how does this affect? Because we've seen a couple of stories of what has been happening at our borders with Tanzania, whether it's Namanga or is it Lunga Lunga. How does this affect business between the two countries? And for how long can you do this?
Well, as you may be well aware, Sam, whenever there is demonstrations, whenever there is any sort of instability within any country, movement of goods and services is obviously the first victim, because you cannot be able to put in your truck or your goods into a demonstration square where you know very well you're going to end up being routed. Anytime there is demonstrations, obviously shops closes. The people who are demonstrating are probably workers from, farms. Kenya and Tanzania does a lot of businesses, especially the produce that we normally receive from them. If you go to Namanga, for example, you would find kilometers of trucks lining up coming into Kenya, especially with maize and other cereals that we import. It is also our gateway from importations that we could be importing from the rest of the COMESA countries, like Zambia, for example, because we have business in Kenya going all the way down to Malawi for importation. So this is obviously affecting movement of goods, and it is affecting businesses as well. In any country that this kind of unrest is happening, you also expect the local businesses to be affected in a big way. We've seen this in Kenya, especially when we've had Maandamano Tuesdays, when we've had the Gen Z protests and all that. The first victim is, of course, the shops. And the shops meaning that you have to shut down your shop whenever you see a demonstration. So economically, it's a big loss. And obviously right now, many businesses have been affected, especially those who have been sort of relying on Tanzanian imports, especially for those dealing with farm produce as a way of income. You can bet, your bet is as good as mine, that currently these have stopped. But further from the truth, other than the fact that the business is affected, I do not really think that the kind of leadership we are seeing coming up within our East African region really cares about how much the businesses could be affected of anybody's livelihood that have been affected by their conduct. The conduct in Tanzania started way back when they decided to put their main opposition leader in jail, It is a political convenience when you see the main opposition leader being arrested, well, months before the election, which means this is something that Tanzania planned way before, and it is unfortunate for any reader to think that their citizens, including ourselves who have interest in Tanzania in terms of businesses and relationships, as we call ourselves, Africa Mashariki, to be able to think or to see that the readers do not see or do not think that we can see through all these plans. Right. When you arrest Tundu Lissu, when you start deporting the likes of Akina Martha Karua who are going for a court case hearing to just ensure that there is justice in terms of how the dispensation of that particular case is done, we can see through all, we can see through. And, the end of it, having an election that you are alone, there was a lot of jokes that was happening online where people are saying that you find in the ballot paper there is Mama Samia, then there is Suluhu, and there's all that. Everybody else who was in that ballot paper is a government stooge and an employee of the government. They were just there to make sure that they legitimize that particular election. However, it is unfortunate for business community. It's unfortunate that this is the kind of governments that we are forming. And at this time and age, that people still think that becoming dictatorial in whatever means and manner, it is how to serve your people. It is unfortunate.
But Iko, you must have heard the President Suluhu saying that akawashukuru wale 16 kwa sababu walishindana kwa hoja.
Difficult Kiswahili or not, you cannot thank your own employees. Those were definitely government. I would even want to see the profiles of those particular citizens. I would not be surprised to find they were all former Chama Pinduzi members and whatever it is, because obviously you can tell they were not into that election into winning. Yeah. They were just escorting someone and legitimizing what it is that particular person was achieving in that election. And that can be seen in white and black. I mean, you don't require a rocket scientist to tell. Okay. I think even the lowest of a kanda in the Tanzanians, food chain can tell what I'm saying. It's true.
Okay, now, Churchill, look, in the East African community, and you find all those countries and the challenges that we are witnessing when it comes to the democratic front, whether it's Rwanda with its 98-99% support for Paul Kagame in the elections, whether you're talking about DRC, I think they had a 70% support for the president, whether it's Burundi, with all its challenges, security and stability. South Sudan never had an election since independence, which was in 2011. Uganda, do you want us to talk about Uganda? And of course now Tanzania. I mean, where then do we stand as a country that is trying to work so hard in the East African community, but our peers, there are certain values they don't think to be important, even when you have to look at their legal frameworks?
Thanks, Sam. Also, just to reiterate what my colleagues have said, it's an unfortunate turn of events that has happened in Tanzania. Just looking at even the headline, the Standard, a bloody crown, and then there are also pictures of dead bodies. So, I mean, even that hasn't even come to the limelight as such. I'm just saying that some of these issues are just being swept under the carpet. But what also you realize, and this is something that I reached out to some of my acquaintances based in Tanzania. Earlier yesterday, just sent them a WhatsApp message, no response up until around 5 p.m. That's when it's like it was a coordinated response. So that's when it occurred to me that now internet had been restored. So the point I'm trying to bring is now, some of the institutions that ideally should be able to ensure that the countries that you're speaking about are quite strong. There's a dearth of credibility in some of those institutions. For the case of Tanzania, if you look at it, internet being shut, electricity supply not being there. So it speaks to institutions quite weak. And in the context of democracy, at least if we have institutions that are quite strong, we may not tend to where some of these countries are. So we need to have robust institutions that could be able to ensure that democracy works. At least for Kenya, you see that even in our constitution, there's a recourse to, if at all there's an electoral fraud or there isn't something that is unbecoming in terms of the electoral process, people can go to the High Court, and we've seen electoral petitions being put within the context of a judicial system. In some of these countries that you've mentioned, that is not there. So we need to see strong institutions which will now supplement even the democracy. At least that's a first step in what these countries need to ensure is in place.
Okay. And of course, the SADC preliminary report on the election observation is making serious recommendations, but also highlighting that the provision in the Constitution of Tanzania that effectively bars any court from entertaining any challenge against the results of a presidential election is contrary to the expectation of electoral justice as envisaged in Article 4.1.5 of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. And so they're recommending various things, including that Tanzania comes up with, let me just read it as it is, in line with the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections of 2021, the government and the National Assembly are urged to prioritize an inclusive process of the review of the constitution of the country with a view to soliciting public views on the current and future modalities with respect to independent political candidates, permitting election petitions related to the presidential election, and judicial review of some of the decisions of the electoral management bodies. Really quite a lot of work to do for not just Tanzania.